My name is Vicki Nishioka, and thanks so much for joining our Education Northwest webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few technical items. First, the webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording and to the presentation slides will be available on the Education Northwest website soon. We'll provide the URL for the site as soon as the webinar is posted. Second, we have muted all phones to minimize background noise. Third, our webinar will begin with presentations on program evaluation with a special emphasis on Gear Up. The presentations will be followed by a brief question and answer time when you can pose questions to any of the presenters. At any time during the webinar, please feel free to type in questions into the chat area located at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Again, welcome and thank you for joining our webinar, Getting the Most Out of Your Gear Up Evaluation. This webinar is sponsored by Education Northwest, an organization that is dedicated to and passionate about learning. Through our partnerships with educators like yourselves, we strive to create vibrant learning environments where all youth and adults can succeed. Today, you'll hear from three presenters. My name is Vicki Nishioka. I'm a senior researcher at Education Northwest and have the privilege of being the lead evaluator of Oregon Gear Up. You will also hear from my colleagues, Dr. Michelle Hodara and Dr. Chungwell Wong. Dr. Hodara leads Education Northwest work in college and career readiness and success. Her research uses quasi-experimental methods to identify the causal impacts of programs and policies on students' educational and labor market outcomes. Dr. Wong is a senior program advisor at Education Northwest who currently leads the evaluation of Gear Up Wyoming and Gear Up Hawaii. He is also a member of the Gear Up Research and Evaluation Consortium, which counts 15 states among its members. During this webinar, the presenters will share information about why evaluation is important, how to plan your evaluation to meet federal requirements and improve stakeholder confidence in the results, and how to make the most of your evaluation. Now more than ever, there is an urgency to spend our time and resources on programs that will make a difference for students and families. Funders and policymakers are asking for evidence beyond success stories. They want evidence from rigorous evaluation. So questions your evaluation should address include, does your Gear Up program work? What components are working or not working? And how can you improve the quality and efficiency of your program? The evaluation should also describe your Gear Up program so that it can be expanded or replicated by others. As you know, Gear Up stands for Gaining Early Awareness and Readiness for Undergraduate Programs. The goals for Gear Up are to increase the academic preparation of low-income students for post-secondary education. Specifically, Gear Up aims to increase high school graduation rates and college enrollment by supporting student success in rigorous classes such as math, science, and English language arts. Gear Up also strives to measure and impact what we call non-cognitive skills that are related to the academic mindset of students. Students with positive academic mindsets work harder, are more dependable, and have the ability to work with others. They also believe that their hard work in school will lead to increased confidence and academic success. Skills associated with academic mindset include persistence, dependability, motivation, the ability to work with others, and intercultural sensitivity. Finally, Gear Up programs are expected to increase the knowledge of students and their families about post-secondary education options such as two-year colleges, four-year colleges, and business and technical trade schools. They also are expected to explain enrollment requirements and ways to gain financing through financial aid and scholarships. A strong evaluation plan should include both a formative and summative evaluation. As you probably know, a formative evaluation focuses on describing your Gear Up program and providing data that will help you make program improvement decisions. A summative evaluation, in contrast, sums up information on the results or impact of your program. It is conducted to provide credible evidence about the worth or merit of your Gear Up program, and it sometimes conducted later in the grant cycle after implementation issues have been resolved. However, it's very important to plan your formative and summative evaluation early, before or during the early stages of implementation. Formative evaluations are designed to answer questions about program improvement or quality. For example, how can I improve the program? Or what do students, educators, parents, or other stakeholders think about your GEARUP program? How would you define your GEARUP services, and what does quality implementation look like? Examples of summative evaluation questions include, did the GEARUP program work as intended? What GEARUP services worked and what services didn't? A summative evaluation may also ask questions related to equity. For example, did different student groups, such as students of color or students in special education, males versus females, experience different outcomes? Logic models are planning tools that provide a picture of the relationships among the resources, services you plan, and the changes or outcomes you hope to achieve. What we have up on the screen is a sample template for the U.S. Department of Education. We're going to go over briefly what a logic model is, but certainly we will provide you a link to a webinar that the U.S. Department of Education just did that describes logic models in much more detail. In this example, the input section provides information about the resources, participants, and community that the GEARUP program serves. As you can see, the GEARUP program serves students who attend schools in rural, high-poverty communities. Most students will be the first generation to attend college in their family. The GEARUP staff identified the lack of student and family knowledge about financial aid as a key barrier to low enrollment in post-secondary education. Based on this assessment, the processes of the GEARUP program focuses on services that will increase awareness and knowledge about financial aid among students, families, and school staff. The activities also include increased support to help students and families complete the financial aid application. The next column in this logic model is outputs. Outputs describe how much time or how many GEARUP activities your program provided. It also reports the number of people who attended these activities. Although outputs provide important information about your GEARUP program, they are not outcomes. Outcomes answer the important question, what difference did your GEARUP program make? In an evaluation, it is useful to organize the results you expect to achieve into short, midterm, and long-term outcomes, such as you see on the screen. Short-term outcomes may measure changes in knowledge, attitudes, or skills. In this logic model, the short-term outcome is increased knowledge about financial aid. Midterm outcomes often measure changes in behavior or decision-making. In this example, the midterm outcome are behaviors that result in an increase in completed financial aid applications. Finally, long-term outcomes measure changes in life conditions or status, such as the long-term outcome for this GEARUP program is to increase student enrollment in post-secondary education. Now, obviously, this logic model does not represent the complexity or the multifaceted approach that of most of GEARUP programs, but it provides you kind of an example of how you can visually link the inputs, the resources, and what the GEARUP program services are providing to the expected results. The purpose of this example was to show how a logic model can help you map the linkages and to identify what is it that you're measuring so that you and your evaluator can design a formative and summative evaluation that fits your specific program. In evaluation, reliable measures provide the same findings over and over again, given the same situation. Important questions to ask yourself or the program evaluator about measures include, are the data trustworthy? Is there a high percentage of missing data? Or has the measure or survey been tested to see if it provides consistent information across different raters or at different points in time? For example, will students with similar levels of, say, math knowledge receive similar results on the math assessment? Validity refers to how well a measure reports on the outcome of interest. So it is important to choose measures that provide reliable data and that the measure provides information about the intended outcomes. If your program goal is to increase the persistence of students to complete 1 year of college, then recording the number of students who enrolled in college will not answer this question. Instead, you will need to gather data on the number of students who remained enrolled in college for the first year and earned whatever amount of credits that you set as a standard for 1 year enrollment. The measures you choose should also gauge progress and provide information that will help you make program improvement decisions, such as, does your Gear Up survey show changes in behavior that are associated with increased college enrollment, or does it show changes in the percentage of students who say they expect to go to college or who have applied to college? Finally, the measures should be minimally intrusive and user-friendly. Factors to consider include the length of time it takes to complete the measure survey. Unreasonably long surveys will make students tired and will affect the reliability of the results. And it also is a really intrusive time and away from academic preparation in classrooms, a significant consideration for schools. We also think about measures, the kinds of questions that measures ask. If they ask questions that seem invasive of student or family's privacy that are unnecessary to get the expected outcome, you may also see a decrease in participation, but also we'll see less honest answers on the survey. Funders require Gear Up programs to use an independent evaluator. To get the most out of your evaluation, it is important to start working with your evaluator early to plan how you would document participation of students, families, and educators, and how you would measure program quality. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Michelle Hodara to share information about rigorous evaluation approaches to measure Gear Up's impact on desired outcomes. Michelle?
Thank you. So how do we know that Gear Up is successful? We might have success stories from students, teachers, and parents, but the Department of Education, policymakers, and other important stakeholders want evidence of Gear Up's success that is more, quote, rigorous. A rigorous, well-implemented evaluation can provide credible and compelling evidence of Gear Up's impact on students. So how do you provide credible and compelling evidence of a program's impact? Including a comparison group in your evaluation tells stakeholders what would have happened to students if they had not participated in Gear Up. But to include a comparison group, you have to consider what kinds of data you can access. Specifically, you need to figure out if and how you can collect data on Gear Up and non-Gear Up students or schools, depending on what type of model you're implementing. So the main reason you want to include a comparison group is that the credibility of Gear Up's impact depends on the extent to which the only difference between Gear Up and non-Gear Up groups is participation in the program. So let me show you an example of why a comparison group is important. So say you want to see if Gear Up had an impact on college enrollment, and this is just made up fake data, fake scenario. Say all students in the graduating classes of 2014 and 2015 received Gear Up services. And so you look at the percentage of these students who enrolled in college in the following year compared to the percentage of students who enrolled in college from the previous two graduating classes of 2012 and 2013. As a side note, one way to examine post-secondary outcomes is to use National Student Clearinghouse data, which is something a lot of the Gear Up programs we work with use, and something we can talk about in the question and answer period. So this type of design is sometimes called a pre-post study because you're examining outcomes before and after the intervention or program is implemented. In this example, Gear Up begins in 2014, and you examine the college enrollment of seniors beginning in 2012 and 2013 when they didn't experience Gear Up, and then after Gear Up started in 2014 and 2015. You can see a bump in college enrollment for 2014 seniors, the first class to experience or to receive Gear Up services. However, you don't know if this increase in college enrollment is due to Gear Up or some other policy or program. So if you can access data on the college enrollment of students at schools that did not receive Gear Up services, you can use a quasi-experimental method called difference in differences. With difference in differences, you compare differences in outcomes in the same time period for students at an additional set of schools that never experienced Gear Up. Here you can see how important it is to include a comparison group. Seniors at non-GEAR Up schools experienced the same exact jump in enrollment from 2013 to 2014, suggesting that GEAR Up did not influence the increase in college enrollment, but perhaps another policy or additional program did. Again, in this alternative scenario, you can see how important it is to include a comparison group. However, this made-up data tells us the opposite stories. Seniors at non-GEAR Up schools did not experience an increase in college enrollment, suggesting that GEAR Up did, in fact, influence the increase in college enrollment. This finding provides credible and compelling evidence of the impact of GEAR Up on students. So the gold standard for identifying a program's impact is an experimental study that randomly assigns students to the treatment versus control group. But randomized studies are often impossible to conduct. So another option is a quasi-experimental study. I just provided an example of a type of quasi-experimental design, difference in difference. Quasi-experimental designs use a carefully matched comparison group. Here are some considerations you want to take in mind in your evaluation for selecting a carefully matched comparison group. First off, you want to choose a good comparison group that's already similar to the treatment group in some way. For example, these are examples from some of the work we do. You could use non-GEAR Up students in the same cohort as the GEAR Up students at different schools. Or you might want to think about using non-GEAR Up Title I schools as a comparison group. Your comparison group will depend on if you have a priority or cohort model. So you want to talk to your evaluator about a good comparison group. Then you want to look at average characteristics of GEAR Up and non-GEAR Up groups that are expected to be highly correlated with the outcomes of interest before GEAR Up was implemented. These characteristics may include measures of academic achievement and demographics, such as gender and race and ethnicity. Then you want to do this to understand the baseline differences between the GEAR Up and the non-GEAR Up groups. If they are very different, then you may want to think about using another comparison group. If they are similar, then this boosts the credibility of your evaluation. Finally, it is even better to, quote, statistically control for these differences when it's time to calculate program impacts. For example, a basic regression model that controls for prior academic achievement and demographics will adjust the program impacts for baseline differences between GEAR Up and non-GEAR Up groups. There are additional steps you can take in this process to select a carefully matched comparison group and improve the rigor of your evaluation. For example, ask your evaluator about the possibility of using propensity score matching, which is a method that identifies a similar group of students from your comparison group and will improve the rigor of your analysis. Finally, there are other types of quasi-experimental studies you may want to consider or ask your evaluator about. For example, interrupted time series design is a study where the outcome of interest is measured multiple times before and after GEAR Up for program participants only. In other words, program participants serve as their own comparison group. Adding a comparison group, such as schools not participating in GEAR Up, substantially improves the rigor of this type of analysis. This type of design is very similar to difference in differences, which I just showed an example of. But a key difference with interrupted time series is you need much more data for interrupted time series design because you need to establish a baseline trend in the outcome prior to implementation of the intervention. Another type of design is called regression discontinuity. This design can be used when a cutoff on a test or another assignment mechanism determines who is assigned to the program or intervention. The underlying assumption of regression discontinuity that must be met is that students around this cutoff are exactly the same, except that those on one side of the cutoff receive the program, while those on the other side did not. This allows you to compare differences in outcomes for students who are the same, except for differences in program participation.
So we want want to end up just giving you some thoughts or suggestions about ways that an external evaluator can help. First, Gear Up teams and evaluators can form partnerships that can lead to more efficient and effective services for students. External evaluators can help design formative and summative evaluations that will produce data that will help you improve your program and assess its effectiveness in achieving positive student outcomes. Evaluators can also help identify reliable and valid measures and to analyze data using rigorous methods. The other way that an evaluator can help you is to think about how to discuss or use the evaluation findings to guide program improvement decisions. They can tell you how to think about what the evaluation results say and what implications it has for program practice. Finally, evaluators can help you develop reports that will tell your Gear Up story to educators, parents, students, and other stakeholders in your schools and communities. And this may include developing user-friendly data displays and shorter reports of highlights of your research findings.
Hi, my name is Cheng Hua, and we've got some very common questions we often ask about the program evaluation relating to Gear Up. The first common question we often ask is, what are the common challenges in program evaluation relating to Gear Up? I've been involved in the evaluation of Gear Up for many years, and as you know, Gear Up is not really a prescriptive federal program. Gear Up has some 3 broad goals. If you look at these broad goals, is really broad. I think anything you do in the school setting or even in community setting can fit in these 3 broad goals. And I tend to use the metaphor and say, well, this is a beauty and the beast. It is a beauty that means all the programs, communities have not of a room to be creative, innovative in designing their Gear Up programs to meet the students in the context of their school setting and the communities. That is the beauty. When I call it the beast, when you do anything that it goes, and I notice you see some programs that spend none of the time talking about, well, is this permissible or is that activity permissible in our Gear Up programs? Then the Gear Up programs become a kind of a streams of funding rather than a coherent program with a specific target, measurable outcomes. In that sense, you see the Gear Up could become a beast. So in dealing with this challenge in program evaluation relating to Gear Up, and I think first thing we need to do is really to help the program articulate exactly what they try to do. And I have examples of the program come to us, say, well, Changhua, we want to do an impact study of this program on our students. And I immediately ask the question, well, who are your Gear Up students? Oh, well, that's a good question. I think you get it right there. And the second thing is, when we do this program evaluation, you do not have to do the quasi-experimental design or random control design for every element in the program. Maybe you can identify one piece that is one of the key components in your program, and you can focus on that. And sometimes it's very hard to do a quasi-experimental design at a program level, but you can select 1 or 2 components of that program and focus on these components and do a very good study design for the evaluation. The second common question we often get is, what are some data sources that are particularly useful for Gear Up? These all depend on what kind of research questions you are asking. And I think in talking about a data source, the most important question you need to ask yourself is this data source relevant to to your research questions. Are your research questions relevant to your program design? Answer these questions first before you talk about what kind of data we're going to gather. But in context of the gear up, the common data source is usually the school level data. Some are college assessment data like ACT data or SAT data. So this is the common, and I think we sometimes complement, you see, those quantitative data with the survey data as well. In fact, you see, as a part of the gear up, all the programs are required to do the survey of the students and the parents every other year. And some state programs or gear up program or partnership programs, they're using the survey as an opportunity to add additional questions to the required questions from the federal government to make the survey complementary to other sorts of data they are gathering. I want to stop here, and I want to ask from our audience, do you have any questions at this point? Okay, while we are waiting for questions, and another common question we often get asked from our practitioners is, what are some ways to share results with the stakeholders? Based on my experience, if it is a formative evaluation, to be timely is the key. And I think you see, to set a regular time to share the progress of your evaluation and the progress of your program is very important. Again, to be timely in sharing your information. And most statewide programs, you see, have multiple sites. Some, you see, like a dashboard is pretty effective because all the sites know what is going on at the state level. And in some cases, they also see how their site compared with other sites as a part of the statewide programs. And I think that is one way we feel is pretty effective. And as an evaluator, and I think keep a regular communication with the program directors, program staff is very important. And I think this is what I'm often saying with my colleagues. You see, the world is not beautiful evaluators. Evaluators have to work around with the reality of the program you are working with. And I think as an evaluator, you have to be very mindful of the needs from our program staff. And sometimes some of the, you see, the stuff they ask us to do are not necessary in our contract. But it's very important for them. You know, the most of the time we do it, and I think that's their needs. And we can talk about, you see, modification of a contract later, and I think respond to their needs is essential when you do the program evaluation. I ask my colleagues, do you have anything to add to these questions?
I do want to say one thing about data displays and reports. I think data and evaluation results don't do any good if they're complicated and they're not understandable and they sit on the shelf because people don't know how to use them. So a very important part of the evaluation process is just providing technical assistance to sites and providing assistance in developing reports and report formats that really communicate the message of Gear Up to many, many different stakeholders, including teachers within the school, to engage them in the Gear Up services or to increase their participation in helping with in changing the culture of the school to a college-going culture, to students and trying to engage them in thinking about the importance of planning for college and for really setting that as a important goal for their life, and also to engage families to begin to change mindsets from college is not for our community or is not helpful for students in our community to one of college is a possibility and it certainly is attainable for each and every student in the school. The other thing that Gear Up reports can help do is to begin to share the message with funders and legislators who are, with the increasing efforts of looking at increasing college enrollment. I think it's important for Gear Up to begin to provide evidence that this is an initiative that can work and that it does make important differences in people's lives.
Yeah, another thing I want to add, this is Changhua, and in doing the program evaluation for Gear Up programs, if you talk with the program directors, they can talk on what they are trying to do, but there is no documentation of exactly, you see, what kind of services students receive. We are talking about dosage of the services the students received. And I think, you see, starting from the very beginning, I think if you're writing a proposal for the Gear Up, think about how you document the services students received, teachers received, parents received, school received, and find out a way to document them. And I think most statewide programs have a database to document the dosage of the services, which is very important because that data can be used or factored in the program evaluation design, and it's very important. Otherwise, we emphasize so much on the impact, but we cannot articulate what exactly the program is, and we cannot articulate the dosage, the variations of the services and students received. And I think have a good documentation of the services will also answer the question, what components of your program is more effective than other ones? So that part is important too. Related to the question, I got another question that people ask, what is the Gear Up Research Consortium? I'm a part of that consortium because I'm doing the work for the Gear Up Wyoming. That consortium was formed about probably 3 years ago, and currently that consortium is managed by ANSET, is a National Council for Business and Educational Partnership. So ANSET is a coordinating manager of this consortium, and with active participation of 15 states in this consortium. Currently, the consortium are doing two major things. In collaboration with ACT, ACT is looking at the ACT data of Gear Up schools with a comparison group, and look at this data longitudinally to see what the difference the Gear Up makes. The other part of the evaluation work the consortium is doing is more led by the consortium members and with Chrissy as a leader for this part of the work, is look at the relationship of Gear Up services and outcomes, that is ACT scores. And I think that's the same outcomes like what ACT is doing. So in a nutshell, that is what the Gear Up consortium is doing. I noticed that Chrissy is in the audience too. Do you want to say anything about this consortium, Chrissy?
Hi, Changhua. Thank you.
Hi,
how are you all doing? Very good job. Thank you. I think I would just add that, I second everything that Cheng-Hua said, and I think, what we're really striving to do is really be able to make comparisons across programs, such that one program may be able to say, this is what our post-secondary enrollment looks like, this is what our FAFSA completion looks like, but when we can start commonly defining what FAFSA completion is, what post-secondary enrollment is, then we have greater numbers to add to the outcome knowledge base that we have. And I will, also just add to that, I think Cheng-Hua is a big part of this. We really struggle with comparison group, and I can't remember the second lady that spoke. Was it Jennifer? Yeah, okay, thank you. But, I think, probably one of the biggest questions that we struggle with, that I know all the grantees will struggle with as well, is, even when you're, putting together a comparison group and you do, things to control for differences, we still, what I think the big missing link for us that we really struggle with is what services might that non-Gear Up comparison group be getting, while we're collecting data on the Gear Up students and the tutoring, mentoring, etc. We have to make the assumption that that comparison group is getting none of that, and so we're always, not sure that that's true. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, but thank you for giving me the opportunity, and you guys have done a great job.
Well, thank you, Christy. And I think just make a point of that, because sometimes you see, for example, one state we worked with, we using Gear Up students as treatment group, of course. And then we look at the data provided by the Department of Education. We look at the other, free reduced lunch students, but they're not a participant in the Gear Up schools. Well, if we're using common sense, well, it looks like you see, well, that is really a good group to use. And I think for priority model, there is a motivation factor. When the Gear Up students, they self-select themselves to be part of the program. And we look at the data, we found just, that comparison group is not really compatible to Gear Up students. For priority model, for those who do not know what is a priority model is different from a cohort model. Priority model, you go to the school, only select the students who want to participate if they qualify. In this case, they are free and reduced lunch students. So when we use other free reduced lunch students, we look at the data, we look at, their scores, they are not necessarily compatible. We found the Gear Up students are much better than those non-participants from the very beginning. That's where the quasi-experimental design play an important role. Then we use a propensity score and to distill from those non-Gear Up students and factor in the Gear Up students, then we come out with a different comparison group, which is more accurate, more compatible. And I think I always encourage common sense, but common sense is not always working in our evaluation and the research. I think that's the point we want to make. And I think given the increased vigor of the evaluation for Gear Up, and for in coming years, it is very important to work with evaluators who know all these methodologies, and at least to get as vigorous evaluation as possible with a good design. Because I noticed some of the evaluation done basically say, well, we pick another school, as Christy mentioned, because the other schools who are non-participants of the Gear Up does not mean that sit there, never receive any services. And all these we have to using either statistic methods or other ways to control, to make it compatible to Gear Up students, which is easy to be said and then can be done. It's very challenging. So I want to make it that a point in doing these program evaluation relating to Gear Up.
I want to thank you for your participation today, and just wanted to point out that there are other webinars that you might find helpful, and we will send out links to this. One of them, there are 2 webinars through the U.S. Department of Education website. One of them describes logic models, like we talked about earlier, in detail, and the expectations that they have around that for anybody who's wanting to submit a proposal. The second just describes in detail the different programs that are funded through Gear Up. We also want to point out that NKEEP has 2 webinars that they are doing. I think one happened last week and the other one is happening shortly in the near future. And we'll send out links to those as well, because we want to make sure that you have the most current information to be able to improve your program and to move forward in getting funding. Thank you very much, and from Education Northwest, we wish you the best of luck in your important work.